The planets have aligned, and once again, the prophecy has come true. That's right, folks. It's time for another episode of the Roundtable Rethink podcast. With me, your host, back again, Uncle Paddy. Joined every week by twin brother and spare parts bin, Andy, the asshole. Woo! And of course, we couldn't do any of this without bestie, Stevie Tel Aviv.
Mercifully
Evening,
not,
boys.
in his pink polka dot bikini.
This week, we will be talking Project Stargate, DeepSeek, Trump coin, TikTok's ban, and any goddamn thing we please. Wow, what a week, guys. It's been an absolute bumper week for news. But before we get into that, how's the week been?
Well, I am full of the January lurgy. I am choking on my own phlegm, but, you know, apart from that, life is good. On a wee personal note, my daughter passed her driving test last week. So we're made up for
What
her.
a world.
And she's out enjoying her newfound freedom, and we're very busy at work just now, so we're firing on all cylinders over at Coast. So life is good, life is busy, but there's nowhere I would rather be than here with you two, about to get into the mother of all dockets.
Life
Stephen.
is good, but it's not as good as Stephen's life. So tell us about your week, Stephen.
Great week. Away with Tracy, Jeremy, the boys, skiing in the Alps. Best week ever. Just beautiful, blue skies, white slopes, and 2 or 3 days where they all buggered off and left me alone.
Which were the best 2 days of the holiday.
Exactly.
And of course, perfectly timed it to miss Storm Alwyn. How do you say that name? It's got a really weird spelling.
So we
Sounds
get-
like Storm
yeah.
Owen.
Yeah, we get January storms every year, but we don't get January storms
No.
like that. I mean, that was once in a kind of 20, 30 year job, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I read a couple of things today that said, and I'm not a climate denier, so let's be clear on that. But you know, this is global warming, and it may well be. But people need to remember this is like the third or fourth big storm in the last every decade or so. We get one like this.
Yeah.
It's still not as bad as a 1968 storm.
Yeah.
So
100 mile an hour winds.
Yeah,
A
but
good
still-
drying day, as we say here in Scotland.
Well, I can certainly attest for how violent it was. I'm still cleaning up the damage. We've got roof damage. We've got trees down. It was, I think the forecast said that by 10 a.m. it would peak. So at 10 a.m. we get up and we're like, oh, what's the big deal? Like, not at all as bad as anybody had predicted. By midday,
Biblical.
man alive, it was
Biblical.
It showed up and it was everything it was cracked up to be. I think the wind speeds peaked in County Clare in Ireland at
113, was it?
118 miles an hour. So the biggest wind speed since 1945. So it was for sure the real deal. And do you know what I remember most about it? I went out the front, so we had the flashings ripped off the roof and they came down on top of the car. And so I went out the front to clear away the debris, and it was the shriek. It was the absolute high pitched shriek in the wind, like
Screaming.
tearing past at 100 mile an hour.
all I
It
will
was
say,
crazy.
however, is if anyone sends me another "there's a twister in Kilbarchan" video, I will find you and I will kill you.
With the ice lolly coming
With
up.
ice lolly. But guys, they're not here to listen to our rantings about our lives because
No.
that's boring. They're
Yes.
here to talk tech. So it has been the most incredible week for world stuff.
For sure.
Inauguration, IT gurus sitting in the front row. The whole AI world has turned upside down. I started a tutorial today at a university, and literally between starting the tutorial and finishing it, the stock market price had bounced to reflect some of the news coming out.
Yeah.
So the world is just changing with incredible speed at the moment.
Yeah.
Truly unbelievable. So let's start with the first story this week, which is Project Stargate. So what is Project Stargate? So a few days after the inauguration, Trump in the press briefing room brings out Sam Altman, Larry Ellison, and Massa from SoftBank.
Yeah.
So Sam is the CEO of OpenAI. Larry Ellison, the world's third richest man, worth $224 billion, is the CEO and Chief Technology Officer of Oracle. And Massa, I mean, talk about a swing for the fences type guy. SoftBank has continuously swung for the fences through the generations. By the way, had some spectacular failures, but when they get it right, man, have they got it right.
Some real duck's eggs. I mean, you've talking. So what was his big wins? There was ARM was a really big win he had.
ARM, he was an early investor in Yahoo.
And no, who's the Chinese company?
Alibaba.
Alibaba was a huge. That was $100 billion win for him, wasn't it?
And then some of the big losses were WeWork. They were one of the biggest investors in WeWork. And then they took them through the spectacular highs, realized there wasn't a business model there with any kind of profitability economics that anybody could make sense of, and then rode it all the way down to a failed IPO. Lost.
And
I think might have recorded the biggest loss in history at one point. But then he's back again.
Completely
with
unperturbed by
hundreds
it.
of billions of dollars ready to go again.
Or does he? Larry Ellison's also an interesting one because for the world's third richest man, not someone that makes the headlines like some of the other big hitters.
Yeah.
But one of these kind of quietly
under the radar
just
executors,
keeps executing at Oracle all the time. So fascinating.
and
lineup.
apparently a real mentor to guys like Elon and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. So Project Stargate, a $500 billion investment in AI infrastructure over the next 4 years. Now think about
4
that.
years? Is it just 4 years?
4 years.
Right.
Think about that number, $500 billion. I was trying to get some crazy analogies.
Mansplaining. $500,000 million.
Yeah, I was trying to find analogies where you could sort of try and truly convey the enormity of that number. It's like if you had 500 billion bananas, you you line them up next to each other, they would go around the world 10,000
75
times.
times.
I mean, it's bigger than the GDP of some developed countries. It's much bigger than the GDP of Norway. It's almost 2 Portugals. It is an incredible sum of money, the biggest single investment in history. And what are they investing in? They're investing in building out AI infrastructure to power this next wave of AI. Now, I think there was initially some skepticism. How much of this is just double counting?
Yeah.
Because there was a previous press conference with Massa a couple of weeks before that where he committed $100 billion. So are we double counting the numbers here, or is it truly an additional $500 billion? The other skepticism, is it vaporware? Is it at some undefined point in the future, or is there any short-term impact? So it turns out two of the facilities are already under construction.
But does that not lend credence to the argument that this is investment from the past that's being recorded now?
I don't think
you don't
that's
build
fair.
these facilities in a couple of months, right?
No, I think it's fair. They've broke ground in Abilene.
Yeah.
By the way, does everybody remember that song? Do you remember growing up as a wee guy and my dad used to sing, Abilene, Abilene, prettiest town that I've ever seen. Women there don't treat you mean down in Abilene. So I don't know why they picked Abilene to build the world's most powerful data centers, but they did. And so broken ground on 2. They're talking about $100 billion being committed immediately, with the other $400 billion coming on stream over the next 3 to 4 years. Now, here was the really interesting part for me. So they were talking about some of the specific use cases they were trying to solve with this project. And in actual fact, the overwhelming majority of the stuff that was referred to was healthcare initiatives.
Yeah.
So outside of Larry's Oracle stuff and his tech stuff, he has a huge philanthropic interest in medical research.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he got up to speak, when he was given the podium, it was hilarious, by the way. Massa's like 4 feet high, and they gave him a stool to stand on like a small child.
That's right.
It was mortifying.
And Larry's like, it's okay, I don't need this tool.
Trump's like 6'5", Larry's 6'4", Sam's tall, and Massa's like 4 feet. They literally gave him a stool to stand on at the podium.
Does that make Massa the wealthier man per square inch?
It does, very much so. So, what was I saying there?
So they trotted them all out in the White House to make this announcement. Massa has obviously got trotted out a couple of weeks previous to say it's $100 billion, and Trump gave him the whole, why don't you make it $200 billion? And
Oh, it was the healthcare stuff.
yeah.
So one of the things they're trying to solve with this is a cure for cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Not my words, not my interpretation, straight from the mouth of Larry Ellison
I heard
from the
that.
podium. So I'll tell you what he explained or what he described on his podium speech. I've also done a bit of digging. I've actually found and followed some cancer researchers online just to see, is there any commentary? Is it the real deal? So he described that through this technology, so apparently when you get cancer, I think most people know your cancer is your cancer, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like anybody else's cancer, which is why cancer's proven so difficult to treat. So as the cancer cells move through your body, they actually sort of shed cells. And so through AI and some of the AI capabilities they're hoping to power with this enormous infrastructure project, they'll actually be able to detect cancer purely from a blood test.
Yeah.
And then from the blood test, 48 hours later, be able to sequence your cancer. And then from there, 48 hours after that, be able to print you a personalized cancer vaccine for your cancer. And so they believe, and the ambition of this project here is that this AI infrastructure project will lead to a cure for cancer. By the way, it was the only stated goal of that initiative.
And all at the affordable price of $1.7 million per cancer vaccine.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, though, that with that type of processing power, it brings fusion and all the other potential solutions to world problems within sight.
Oh, 100%. I mean,
But I think on the cancer front, what they were saying was their ability to look at microscopic for AI to basically examine your blood and look for these microscopic fragments of this cancer that's been shed as the cells are moving through your body before they coagulate into a tumour. So almost before you're symptomatic, they'll be able to detect, you have cancer, and then within a week later, you'll be on your own personalised vaccine to cure you.
So to put that into context, just very quickly, South Korea's population is halving over the next 30 years. But the good news is their age demographic is going to double. So they're going to have the number of people that will live twice as long.
Yeah.
So they're definitely going to need this. One of the things that also came out of the conversation was the job creation element to this. So how does it actually impact the economy? So they're talking about 100,000 jobs effectively immediately to build out the infrastructure. The only difficulty I see with this with job creation is these data centers take an enormous amount of resources to build, but when they're built, they're actually unbelievably autonomous. And you only need literally dozens of employees to run a data center like this.
Any giant 500,000 square foot.
Exactly.
Mega
So these
structure.
like dreadnought mega structures, you've got like 30 or 40 employees rattling about the building, and that's pretty much manning the whole thing. And
am I right in saying part of the architecture of them is they're now building their own on-site power generation? So baked into the design of these new AI data centers is the LNG plants that will actually power them as well.
Yeah.
So that's the power generation's getting stood up in tandem with the actual design itself instead of depending on the existing grid locally.
Yeah, you're almost building the power plant onto the side of the building. They're talking about solar battery storage as the primary source of energy for these plants, and they seem to have promises from whoever they need them from that all regulation will be moved aside and all permitting will be moved aside. They'll be able to build whatever the fuck they want, basically.
And obviously LNG, but the LNG stuff obviously ties in with the whole drill, baby, drill thing, you know.
So I think it's solar and battery storage primarily backed up with LNG on site, literally on site next to the facility. So now it's sitting here in the UK in the frozen
nuclear moonscape of Ayrshire.
I am jealous and I find myself envious and I find myself sad and a wee bit hopeless. I'm so envious of the ambition, the size and the scale and the ambition of a project like this. And it hurts my heart that nothing like this would ever really happen in Europe, although they have had quite an interesting response to that. And we might come back to that later in the podcast. It truly is only something that could happen in America. And so...
Or China.
There's a part of it that kind of hurts my heart, knowing that we'll never be able to do stuff like that here.
Well, they're building a new bandstand in Kilmarnock High Street, so...
Again, I think we'll move on to another time. But I think countries have their moment in time. We were and have been a world leading power for well over a century. But our time might have passed for world domination.
So can we just speculate for a wee second beyond the health tech type of stuff? What other... This kind of level of AI, the sophistication of the models, coupled with almost unlimited hardware, horsepower, compute. So other than diagnostics and detecting fragments of cancer, What are the other applications that this can potentially be deployed against?
I think it's easier to list out the things that it can be deployed against
Yeah.
than it could be deployed against.
Yeah.
I mean, it could unlock the key to all the biggest problems and all the biggest things that ails society.
Yep. Power, fusion, robotics, autonomous.
Yeah.
So all of the things that we are currently struggling with may well be driven by this type of technology. Or we may have a dead end, which we're going to waste an awful lot of money on. But I think at the moment that we do seem to feel that is the direction to go down.
Yeah. So the interesting part is OpenAI have operational control of the project, so they're very much in the lead. And then Massa has financial control of the project. There are other backers. There's a company based out of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, MGX, who's a backer in the whole thing as well. But fundamentally, SoftBank are in the lead financially, and OpenAI are in the lead from an operational perspective.
Can I ask a question on that one? Because again, my understanding of it was it's a $500 billion investment, but it's not all liquid cash that's going in. My understanding was it was a certain amount of liquid cash and then a lot of borrowings on the back of it. Various funds.
That was the big bun fight that came out of that. So Elon came straight out and said, bollocks, they've got maximum 10 billion liquid. So it turns out between the debt equity structure that you do to stand these places up, you might only need 80 billion pounds in hard cash to build 500 billion pounds worth of infrastructure.
Yeah, it's like buying a
over
house,
4 years.
So buying it, taking a mortgage, you've got 75% down, 25% down, 75% for the bank. So when we talk about £500 billion, actually it's all there, but a lot of it is actually borrowed funding against the infrastructure cost.
Yeah. Cool. Now, it's hard to talk about Project Stargate without dovetailing it into certainly the biggest story this week, maybe the biggest story, I was going to say this year, but it's only January, maybe the biggest story of any year, which is the emergence in the last 48 hours of the Chinese AI model called DeepSeek. And so this might actually make this $500 billion investment project a bit of a turkey. So what Chinese researchers have figured out how to do is develop and deploy an AI model called DeepSeek with similar or even better capabilities than the very best models from ChatGPT, in particular on things like coding, math, academic reasoning. It exceeds anything that ChatGPT are producing, and it was trained at 95% less cost than ChatGPT.
The whole training cost was $6 million.
$6 million trained on 2,000 H800s, which are 2 generations behind. And so for me, it is fascinating. Like, what do they say? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? So we have very strict export controls for technology on China so that they can't get their hands on the latest tech, the latest chips. So they're always working 2 or 3 generations behind. And so they came at the problem a completely different way. Everybody right now is throwing horsepower at this problem. It's like, well, my cluster's 100,000 GP. Well, fuck you. Mine's is 500,000. And wait till I get 2 million. Wait till you see what we can do then. The Chinese don't have that option right now because they're working with 2nd generation hardware, 3rd generation hardware. So they came at it from an efficiency point of view, which, by the way, as somebody who used to build software, is always the way to solve a software problem, right? Adding servers and adding horsepower was never a solution to any problem. It was always the big benefits and the big efficiencies were always in the code base. It was just go back, look at the code base. How do you figure out how to make it more efficient? So DeepSeek fundamentally came up with a new approach to train and deploy a model. And how did they do it, right? So I have spent the entire day...
You tried to explain this.
I have spent the entire day reading the white papers and having AI models summarize them and trying to dumb it down so your grandma can understand it.
Just make it enough so I can understand it.
Listeners, brace for impact.
And I have failed to be able to communicate in such a way. So as best as I could explain it to a layperson is they invented effectively a new mathematical approach to solving the problem. So the best analogy I've seen today is models are made up of parameters, right? And there's billions of them. And so a model like ChatGPT is close to 1 trillion parameters. And so the DeepSeek model, apparently is 671 billion parameters. So just one of the efficiencies they managed to find is they were able to intelligently figure out, of the 671 billion parameters, how many of them did they actually need to light up to solve any specific problem. Okay? And the analogy I gave you guys earlier is, imagine a football stadium full of experts in every subject in the world, and you have a question about dolphins. Okay? Why are they so cute? Why do they make their funny noises? So you have a question about dolphins. Well, if you want to understand something about dolphins, you don't need to go to the guy who does roofing or dentistry and ask him the dolphin question. So how do you know that of the 671 billion parameters, the 27 billion you need to light up to solve a dolphin problem? And so fundamentally, they solved that. They solved that issue and are now able to run these parameter models much smaller and much lighter than big models like ChatGPT. There was other math-related stuff. And by the way, these guys are quantitatives. They're a Chinese group of quants, math quants. So some of the best math people in the whole world.
And by the way, how does that feed into my prediction from the other week?
Andy the asshole starting to look like a genius and no longer an asshole, because he predicted only 2 weeks ago that this would be the year that AI would go mainstream and that real people would find... What was your prediction?
My prediction was that this would be the year that AI would become useful and practical for ordinary people.
And it's also, all we're seeing is what's happened in history. This is Moore's Law all over again.
Yeah.
The ability to double and half in price, double and half in price. In fact, even this is going exponential now.
100x reduction in price.
Well, you've got the two axes. You're multiplying the capabilities whilst collapsing the cost simultaneously. So it's an open source model. It's not a closed source model. So the code is out there. Anybody could download that model and run it on their own hardware. The white paper about how they approached the problem and solved it is out there. So you have to think that every engineering team at OpenAI, and Google, and Grok, and all the different AI companies are now poring over that white paper and figuring out how to make their models just as effective. So that brings us nicely to today. And so what have the markets reacted to, Stephen? They've basically assumed that if these models can now be deployed and trained at 95% of the cost that we thought it took to train those models 48 hours ago,
stroke less hardware requirement,
then the hardware requirement collapses, which is why you've seen the stock price of NVIDIA, the stock price of all the chip companies basically collapse today.
Yeah.
I think they have bounced back a little bit, but at some point today, they were down 8, 9, 10% in some cases.
Yeah. Again, I think what's interesting is that, like all of these things, it's the rule of unintended consequences. We don't know yet what it's going to mean. That £500 billion of investment may now be multiplied in its effectiveness.
Exactly.
Yeah. So ultimately, this may still be, and this is still a race because there's all kinds of prizes still up for grabs. And all China's done is going to push the technological race further and faster.
I think it's challenging the assumption that we always thought there was ever going to be half a dozen model makers because the price to play in that game was in the hundreds of millions or in the billions. Well, if you can build a model now for a few $1,000,000, then the amount of participants that can afford to play opens up massively. Big corporations and companies can now start realistically developing their own models if they can figure this stuff out. So I think fundamentally the competition is going to explode here. That's going to drive the two axes that we keep talking about, which is you're going to see more and more capability. You're going to see the cycle time reduce as well, whilst at the same time the cost is collapsing. Just to put that in perspective, so DeepSeek can produce 1 million tokens for 10 cents. ChatGPT costs $2.50 to produce the same 1 million tokens. That's the level and collapsing of cost that we're talking about here. And what's it going to be when it's a penny for 1 million tokens, a fraction of a penny for 1 million tokens? And it's pretty clear now at this point that we're going to get to those levels. And that opens up that capability to everybody. Last thing on DeepSeek, they're now the number one app. In 48 hours, they're now the number one app on the iPhone and the App Store, having overtaken ChatGPT. That's how quickly things can change in this environment.
So it's not just BYD and all the Chinese car manufacturers eating our lunch. It's now the Chinese tech companies eating our lunch as well.
When you worship at the altar of capitalism and competitiveness,
Yeah.
you can't ever say that it's not a good thing.
No.
I mean, at the end of the day, this is actually good for the world. It's just going to be interesting to see which model. This is back to the space race. This is back to Russia against America, first man on the moon. I think it's a fabulously exciting time, and I think only good stuff comes from it.
Yeah, I'm a super nerd, super geek. I love this stuff. I have been buzzing for days now. Absolutely buzzing for days. And by the way, top tip, anybody who's as cheap as Stephen and refuses to pay for the paid version of these models, DeepSeek is free.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. It's free. Log in with your Gmail account and you're up and running. I've been on it for the last 2 days. I can tell you right now, comparing the outputs between that and the leading models, it's every bit as good and it costs absolutely nothing.
There you go.
So if you're as cheap as Steven, get on DeepSeek right now. Download it for free. Right, moving on. Okay, so next up, we are going to talk Trump coin.
What do the Hawk Tuah girl and the President of the United States have in common? Did they A, spin on that thing? Or did they B, launch their own respective shitcoins within a month of each other? Spoiler alert, it was B! Stephen.
So I've tried to go down the rabbit hole of Trump coins, meme coins. You had a really interesting piece last week, Andy, about cryptocurrency, why it is a store of value, the rules to make something a store of value. And I've really been trying to understand, what is Trump coin all about? So let's take a bit of a kind of step back for a second. What is Trump coin? It's not a cryptocurrency. It's not a Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Bitcoin has got value. It's a meme coin, M-E-M-E, meme coin. What does that mean? It's a trading card. Remember you used to get these like football cards, baseball cards.
Yeah.
You could trade them with each other. It's just a trading card.
A digital version of that.
A digital version of it. You can transfer it for, you can sell it for money, but you can't buy anything with it. It's not something that's ever really going to be able to be used to purchase things.
And the code's not working towards anything. It's not trying to find utility or meaning in the future, right? It is just what it is.
So again, the code's really interesting. So let's start with, how do you create one? Because I think we should have...
The Roundtable Rethink coin, the RTR coin.
The coin is in a perfectly spherical shape of Stephen's beautiful head.
And indeed, my big fat tummy. However, how do you create a meme coin? I think that was the interesting thing, first of all, for me. So ultimately, within sensible boundaries, there's very little involved. What you do is, it's a bit like Volkswagen. Think about Volkswagen cars. They create this floor plate and then Seat and Skoda and whoever else pop
The body shell on
top of
On
it.
the skateboard, yeah.
That's all a meme coin is. It's something that sits on somebody else's platform.
Yep.
And there's multiple meme coins out there, and there have been many meme coins out there. In fact, it's one of the interesting things about Trump coin, because we could have the Trump table coin. It's not copyrighted. In fact, there are a number of coins that are pretending or look like they could be a Trump or an Havana coin. So ultimately, you can build anything on that body shell. What's involved? Paddy, you'll know a lot more about it than I will, but basically a bit of code, pay a coder a few tens of thousands of dollars to kind of create the code. You've then got some creation fees, a few $100s to actually create it within the structure itself. Marketing, if we were doing it to get traction, we might have to spend 100,000, $1 million to get actual interest, people involved in it.
If you're the world's most famous person about to be inaugurated as the President of the United States,
it's basically for free. So ultimately, if you reckoned he spent maybe $1 million, nice round figure, $1 million to $2 million, he's created his own coin. What did he get for that? He got 1 billion tokens. So 1 billion tokens. I'll not work out the arithmetic. It makes it something like 0.00001 cents a coin. So it's next to nothing to create the coins. So what gives it value? So at the moment, that coin started off trading around about the $10 to $20 mark. It got up to about $70. It's now down to about $27.
Okay.
So it's got a value. But what gives it that value? And it's back to simple economics: supply, demand, supply and demand. So supply, Trump got 1 billion coins, of which he has released 200,000. And I would say Trump, I mean the Trump organization.
Yeah.
I think the whole insider label for this, I think it's like a white label company that do this for a lot of personalities now. So if you look at the on-chain stuff, him and his insiders all come under the CIC Digital pseudonym. And that's the problem with these crypto wallets. You can name them anything. So you can see everything that's happening, but you don't actually know who's buying or selling the coins because it's always under these daft names like Panda216.
So you know more about this than me. So it sounds like there's an underlying technology company who's the rails for this whole thing.
And they get a piece of the action.
And then they approach celebrities and people who've got a captive audience, and then they help them mint their own shitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So we now have this coin. And because obviously of the fame of the person, you've got demand. So ultimately this 0.000001 coin is suddenly worth, at its height, $75. What's that? About $1.5 billion of wealth created from zero. Cost to set up, negligible. What are the good points? What are the bad points? What are the worries? Well, there's the kind of simple question of, is it right that someone who is president of the United States or his organization has the ability to trade off that brand? I'm not saying does or doesn't. It's an interesting one. Probably hasn't been done before. There have been many, many tokens, commemorative coins, hard coins, gold-plated things, but no one really has done this before.
Is it behaviour unbecoming of the leader of any country for people to be able to directly, personally put money into his or her pocket?
I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because I think that's another country's jurisdiction, another country's president. What I am going to say though is it is a coin that is purely driven by supply and demand. So at the moment, you're right, who's buying it? 3 categories I can see. 1, the loyal supporters, the MAGA, and they see it as a way of supporting their president, supporting their country. Fabulous. The fear is it sits, as I say, on a platform which is not particularly well regulated. The value of the coin could go to zero, and a lot of people may lose substantial amounts of money. So that's the first fear. Is this something which is just...
And so can I just expand a wee bit on the structure of it, just on that point alone?
Well, Andy, play both sides of it, right? What's the for case and what's the against case? Because, like Stephen says, I mean, it's collectible. It's somebody looking to support their guy. It's almost like a GoFundMe, right? And then what's the anti case for it?
The anti, so...
No, I'll give you the anti case. You give me a for case.
Well, that's harder.
Okay, so let me run through why I think these are all bad ideas. So you've got unsophisticated investors putting substantial amounts of money into something which is potentially very speculative and not particularly well regulated. Secondly, you have got speculators. That's fine. I have no problem with that. That's a risk, and sophisticated investors are welcome to take those risks. You've got a third category, which is very worrying, which is those who may decide to invest to try and curry favour. And there's a lot of stuff out in the press, so nothing I'm saying is particularly unique. But just to go through that simple scenario. Hello, Mr. President. I'd quite like you to remove your weapons from Ukraine this week. Oh, I'm not so sure I want to do that. Well, I was thinking of spending 2 or 3 billion on Trump coins. And of course, immediately that would create a huge uplift. So you suddenly have this mechanism which would be hard to regulate, hard to prove, which would give financial influence over someone who should not have.
So you're saying large investors or individual people who've got the means to invest could potentially have influence over Trump?
Yeah.
By increasing the value of the coin.
And honestly, when you go down that rabbit hole, the scenario I come up with is, hi, I am would-be future dictator in South Sudan. I'm planning a coup. I would really like you to turn a blind eye to all the terrible things that I'm about to do. And I've decided to just dollar cost average over the next 12 months, $100 million a month into Trump coin. And if you just sell at a controlled rate of knots, then we won't destabilize the value of the coin, and you can cash it to the tune of billion. Like, unfortunately,
I think while that concerns me, I think it is another use case. It's quite out there in the open. I think the thing that worries me most about this is we have a government that's come in that's talking about regulating cryptocurrency, the importance of cryptocurrency as part of the AI global infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And effectively, I think this takes away from the authentication, the gravitas of what we would like cryptocurrencies to be. So I think the first 2 or 3 cases all worry me, but I actually think this is just a horrible distraction. I don't think it's something that we should be seeing at a time when we're trying to see if there's a way to build the cryptocurrency infrastructure.
And so I actually think it's completely unbecoming grift behaviour, right? I think, forget Trump, there's no head of state should be doing this for all the reasons that you mentioned and more. But what's going to be really interesting in terms of how the coin's architected, so there's a minimum 90-day lockup period, so none of the origin addresses can vest their coins for the first 90 days, and it runs in a kind of linear vesting between 90 days to 24 months.
Okay, so just to play it back for lay people, you can't pump and dump the coin. Right? It's not like you can pump its value, dump all its value the following day. There's a lockup period for what I understand.
Now,
it's 3 years.
Again, I'm not an expert,
Yeah.
but again, that's the interesting part about building your own body shell on top of the Solano chassis. You dictate the rules of your coin.
That is the rules.
But I don't know if that's a universal rules for all
It
Solano
might be the
coins.
rule for that coin.
It's a rule for that coin.
And that's my point. So what's interesting is that when you build the chassis, and this is what people, again, don't understand, when you are buying a Seat or a Volkswagen, you have to understand what the difference in what you're getting for your money. Some of the bits are exactly the same. Some of the bits are different, and people don't always understand the small print. So my understanding, I wasn't aware of the 90-day rule, but that I think is a Trump coin scenario, not a Solano coin scenario.
And another thing that's not very well understood either is, even though you're not selling the coins, the insiders, the Trump team and the insiders are making transaction fees for all the trading that's happening. And I believe there's been over $15 million in transaction fees already. And a lot of that kicks back to the inside team.
Right. Okay.
Well, there's a bid offer spread. The other thing I found fascinating, and again, it's just as an example, I'm not even quite sure what the relevance of it is. At the moment, if we take a day's trading, the market cap, the volume of trading in Trump coins today was just under $4 billion. Just under $4 billion of volume trade. And that's from meme coin. Apple shares, the biggest company in the world, Apple shares volume today was just under 52 billion. So 12 times. So effectively, the biggest company in the world is only trading 12 times
more than the shitcoin that came into existence last week.
And it shows that there's something, again, really strange what's going on with all of that. So I think there's lots of things to be concerned about. For me, the things I'm going to be keeping an eye out for is spikes. If I see a spike in the price and suddenly something major goes wrong in the world, I'm going to start asking questions.
But think about the velocity of value creation. So at its height, so within a few days of launching, the fully diluted market cap of the coin. So if Trump had dumped all his coins, now, theoretical fully diluted market cap, if he dumped all his coins, it would have dumped the price as well.
It would have gone to zero.
But if the fully diluted market cap within days was $70 billion, how many companies have taken 100 years, 50 years to grow into a $70 billion company? And it just shows you the power of celebrity now.
Yeah, but I think what's scarier is for the poor MAGA supporters who were probably the first people in, they've taken their $70 buy-in price and dropped that down to $25 within a matter of
But part of me, and I know that this is me just being Andy the asshole, but part of me just goes, it's Darwinian evolution just playing out. I'm sorry. There's a lot of
I don't agree with that, because for some people, they wouldn't have seen it as an investment. It was just a way to support their guy.
Yep.
But don't get it twisted, Paddy. A lot of the guys join, they think they're getting in early on these crypto pumps to try and make money on the way up. They're not anticipating losing 2/3 of their money.
And it's back to my final point, which I think this is the problem. I think we're trying to regulate and create a digital currency. We're trying to understand Bitcoin use cases, and I'm struggling to really understand all of the things that are happening here. How ordinary investors can differentiate between a Trump coin, a meme coin, Bitcoin, Solano.
Yeah, because they all sound the same, right? Because they've got coin in the
yeah.
name, but they're all completely different and play by a different set of rules.
Can we finish it on a lighter note? So one of the things that I thought was hysterical is that after the inauguration, so do you remember the pastor that was his name was Lorenzo? So he's the guy that did From the mountains of Georgia, let freedom reign. Well, he actually came out within an hour.
His own coin.
Within an hour of the inauguration to announce his own meme coin.
The dollar store MLK coin.
Lorenzo Sewell. And do you know who he reminded me of? And I went back and just watched the clip before tonight because I knew I was going to mention
Reverend Brown from Coming to America.
Do you remember Reverend Brown from Coming to America?
I love the Lord.
When I see these ladies from the Miss Black America pageant, I feel good because I know there's a God somewhere. He is Reverend Brown.
I did think it was a weird performance. It was very performative.
Cartoonish,
it was very kind of look at me. But there was a lot of stuff like that happened at the inauguration.
I personally think we should go back to trading cards. It'd be much better. It'd be much more fun to trade them than to find these virtual coins with strange names.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we finish up on the TikTok, man.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Andy the asshole. Tell us about the TikTok, man.
Right. So you may or may not know that the United States implemented a ban on TikTok, which was supposed to come into effect on January the 19th. Main reason, of course, national security concerns. Everybody very concerned that ByteDance, who owns 60% of TikTok, could be coerced by the CCP to release user data and could be used to track US citizens and stuff. So, interestingly, the day before the ban came into play, President Trump announced a 90-day extension in which the company would try and find a non-US purchaser. And then he went on to suggest that they should give the US government 50% of TikTok in return for a trading license in the US. So before I go any further at all, just on that point, did anybody think that was a serious idea? Or was he just trolling?
The phone's going here. It's Tony Soprano. He loved it.
It was straight out of the Mafia handbook. I mean, let's look at the parallels. Let's look at that really was saying. So could you go down any street in Manhattan and shut every restaurant in Delhi and say, bad news, the US government is closing you down. Good news, you can reopen again if you sign over half of your business to me.
The bit that I don't quite understand is on the other side of this coin, I'm assuming Facebook has access to parts of China. Is Facebook banned in China?
I don't think Facebook operates in China, no.
Okay. Are there any other large
Google
American
certainly doesn't.
social media?
No, they've got
So
their
there is
own.
no quid pro quo. Right. So there's my point scuppered then.
Yeah, I think the question is, are the concerns legit?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really? I'm not sure they are.
In fairness, I thought
I think there's probably 15,000 ways that the CCP could acquire American user data if they wanted it.
I think Trump made a valid point, which is cars, Chinese goods, the chips or the data's there. It can be got a million other ways. So,
I think it was purely political because one of the points that I wanted to make was that TikTok actually spent $2 billion on this, what they called Project Texas. And it was basically a series of initiatives to appease US lawmakers about user data. Now, rhyme some of these off, Paddy, and you're the kind of tech guru, so you can tell me if all this stuff checks out. So they were offering data localization, storing all the US user data exclusively on Oracle Cloud within the United States. Yep. The creation of what they called the US Data Security Subsidiary to manage American user data with the board members approved by the US government. strict data flow controls, implementing measures to limit data leaving the US with some exceptions for global functionality, and US-based employees staffing USDS with employees based in the United States and a third-party oversight commission.
To me, if the concerns are truly about data and data leaking back, they're a super duper reasonable set of mitigations that should put a pin in that whole argument.
Yeah. The point to me, though, is, and again, you've got government has said legislation. The Supreme Court has said it's been challenged and we're upholding the government's legislation.
Yeah.
How then can the executive step in and say, stop? And that's the bit I find really strange when you've got the whole system that's actually put the ban in place
it's been through
and verified it. How can it then be stopped? Rightly or wrongly,
Yeah.
you know, that there should have been a much more transparent process.
It must
to open that
fall
conversation
within
again.
these executive order protocols.
I think
somewhere.
it's a
Yeah.
fascinating one for a future pod, by the way. Understanding executive orders.
It's obviously politicized, and I think the argument's weak. If the argument was TikTok is horrendous for 14-year-olds and they spend 28 hours a week on it and they're
That's
easily
definitely not the
manipulated
argument.
and then we wouldn't even be having this argument. I'd be like, absolutely, ban the fucking thing. Because that's how I feel about it. I feel like social media, period, for teens is radioactive.
100%. But
But that's not the argument they're using. It's
and
all
here's
based on
what's
bullshit.
up for grabs, right? So forget whether it's right that the US government should own 50% of it for free just by dishing out a license. Here's what's actually up for grabs. So TikTok has 170 million users in the US, with each user spending 53.8 minutes a day on the service. Now, even more importantly, they have $22 billion worth of ad revenue in the US. So who benefits for TikTok getting closed down?
Facebook.
Where does that revenue go?
Yeah.
Facebook.
Or
And it's
YouTube.
YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or any of the social platforms, X,
The
Instagram.
work's actually been done on this, by the way. The Bernstein Group did the work on this. They reckon 60% it'll go to Meta in the form of Instagram and Facebook, with the rest of it going to YouTube and a wee tiny bit going to Snapchat.
I think what I read also was that Facebook Meta manages to monetize that those streams much more effectively. There'll be a multiplier effect.
Yeah.
They've been much more effective their monetization of those videos.
But mercifully, in the last couple of days alone, it's actually becoming clearer now that it's not going to be the US government that step in and taking ownership of it. It's actually going to be a private buyer. And the front runners are already Oracle, Microsoft, and guess who? Mr. Beast. We are a consortium of billionaires and hedge funds behind them, fronting it.
I think there's a business point here as well, which is if you're a creator
Yeah.
on TikTok and that's how you make your living, once again, and how many times do we need, this is like an old movie now, isn't it?
Yeah.
How many times do we have to learn the lesson? You've got to build a direct relationship with your audience, because if you go through any of these platforms, eventually, through regulation, through geopolitical spats, some reason you're going to get wiped out.
Yeah.
We can also say this is the first election probably in history where social media platforms, whatever the audience was for the Trump organization, long form podcasts were probably the two things that clearly swung this election in the Trump camp.
Yep.
So, again, the power of both of these things. And of course, the Roundtable Rethink podcasts.
Yeah.
So I thought that was quite interesting. Who knows who'll eventually get it? But I think it's clear now it's definitely not going to. Because I think when you look at the downstream second and third order effects, if the US government own it, does that mean they're then responsible for the content that's on it? Not to mention all the business angles for it. So thank God it looks like it's going to end up in private ownership, and it's not going to be run by the government. But yeah, there you go.
Okay. That's it, boys.
We did it.
We've done it again. Episode 3 in the can. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up here?
I just want to shill the RTR coin before we finish up.
So despite all the ethical concerns we talked about shit coins, we're minting one next week.
Again, I think it's going to be fascinating to work out how much will the world change in the next 7 days.
Some weeks you're scanning the news trying to find things to talk about that might be interesting, and then other weeks you're inundate it. And this
Drowning
was
in juicy current
100. I mean,
stories.
there's 50 other stories we could have covered this week that were just as interesting, but I think we hit all the big stuff for the week. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this AI stuff continues to develop, because I don't think these guys can afford to sit on the sidelines. There's going to have to be a response here. So I think you're going to have to see a response from OpenAI. We never even talked about OpenAI's operator functionality, their ability to launch a browser in the GPT window and have it go and do a bunch of work. Another prediction that Andy the asshole basically jumped on a couple of weeks ago. So it's just crazy the way that this is developing, but I'm here for it, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll be here every week bringing you the latest AI.
And there's more juicy stories
Tech.
to dig into next week, so we'll keep our powder dry. But
Yeah.
Yep. And as always, don't forget to
Like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or find us at the website at www.roundtablerethink.com.
You say that so well.
All right, boys, that's it. It's done. Bye-bye.
Good night and ciao.